Howdy, all you delicious people. I am here today to ultimately review the first 8 episodes of High Rise Invasion, which ultimately is a new anime series that had dropped on Netflix. And ultimately, I was like, you know what? There's something about this visually that I really liked and or enjoyed. Like, there was something about the simplicity of this anime also that won me over eventually. It kind of got me to the aspect of realizing that it's like, okay, so this is yet another one of those, like, you have it to where there's a bunch of people that all get dropped into this world, and ultimately, there seems to be some people that end up being the prey, and some people that end up having to forcibly be the predators. We ultimately have it to where seemingly there are, to otherwise bizarrely have it seemingly that there are a bunch of people that ultimately are on top of buildings for the most point. It seems that everybody is on some top of some building, and then eventually a masked character with a smile upon his face ultimately comes and tries to kill somebody. But in all actuality, the characters don't actually 100% go and try to legitimately kill most of the people. They end up hoping that these people will end themselves on their own by jumping off these buildings. We ultimately seemingly also have every single building that is otherwise tied to a bridge from one to the other, bizarrely. Um, Going into this show, I immediately thought, like, okay, there's something interesting about this. It seems like it has an interesting hook. It feels kind of different than a lot of other animes that I've seen. There is also that normal threat of ultimately otherwise having a girl ultimately uh, getting having a girl like being forced to do things that she doesn't want to do, having a man basically uh, threaten her to otherwise justifiably uh, take off some portions of clothes and stuff like that. But reasonably, for the most point, most of this show is fairly censored and fairly covered up for the most point. It's not one of those where it's a consistent theme of we need to see some skin or whatever in the show. So going into here, I thought it was interesting to kind of see that every single masked character would have some theme to them. Like every single character would be like the sniper mask or the knife mask uh, or the axe mask or whatever. Everybody had their own hook. Even at one point, we end up having a seemingly baseball mask guy, which I thought was interesting. So going into here, we mostly have two characters that are mostly the focus, which is Yuri and Mayuko. I guess I had figured out that, hey, how about I go into like a wiki and ultimately see if I can find some visuals of these characters, and luckily I did because I'm like, oh, thank God. I'm like, luckily these were adapted from a manga or whatever, so ultimately I could see some visuals of this character. So I was like, yeah, so I can technically know who these characters were because normally I would not know. So, but ultimately, the only people that'll probably confuse or mix around about is if I don't have a visual for them, or ultimately I'll just call them knife person or mask person because looking at it, there's so many effing masked people. It would take forever to decipher each one of them. So, going into this, and plus there's so many people that eventually get added in here, it just becomes ridiculous. Uh, so And plus, I don't think I'm going to mention every single character. It's going to take too much time. So it told me say so and so person. Anyways, so going into here, I like I was a little bit baffled because I'm not used to this kind of approach of of an anime. Like it kind of feels so weird to me, and I've seen a lot of weird animes. But when looking at this, this feels kind of like okay. This feels like like I don't want to say the word like Maze Runner or Hunger Games or something like that. Like because it's done on a completely different world supposedly. Interestingly enough, we do have a police force that kind of comes into the fray, but ultimately that's just kind of like random whoever gets into this. Like it kind of reminds me of the anime Gantz. If you've never seen the anime Gantz, go ahead and check that out. I think Netflix has a movie of it, which you can ultimately go and see. Um, I love Gantz. If ultimately you guys can otherwise check out an app called Nine Anime and probably be able to see any number to the second it's recording, be able to see any anime for absolutely free at any point in time. So, what is this anime ultimately about? So, we ultimately have people dropped out of this bizarrish location that doesn't make sense, and I don't think it'll actually ever come to the consensus of what this all is. Like, we ultimately have it to where seemingly everybody is seemingly dropped seemingly into this skyscraper-esh like building or very high up building, and so we end up having it to where they are all just trying to survive as long as they humanly possibly can. At some point we have, yeah, like I said, we ultimately have some people ending up putting on these smiling mask personas. And really, we also have it to where I guess the objective is the game is to find people that make their way closest to God, and so ultimately that is also the in a bizarrish objective of this game. And so ultimately, we also find out that there is some defect things going on here, or people with certain abilities that end up going into the game. It's kind of goofy and or weird. But at the end of the day, um, that's all I think I want to say in a very spoiler like sense. Let's ultimately go into the very unspoiler like sense. I really thought that this. I really thought that this show was kind of really interesting. For some people, it might be a little bit like slow or maybe too gory for some people or whatever. Like I don't think it goes way out of being too gory. Like it's not like somebody's pulling a spine out of somebody's back or whatever. No, like if anything, like some people might just be like, at some points, but really when looking at it, like this show isn't too vicious and too what like. I think reasonably this show just has a visually interesting thing about it, and people are just gonna like okay, like trying to figure out what is going on with the show. So let's go into these spoiler times. These spoiler times. I honestly, my real true consensus is I just like this show. Even though I just kind of thought it was I thought it was so bizarre. Like, and I've seen bizarre kind of anime, but this is kind of just, it's bizarre in a different way just because I'm like, this makes no sense. Like, nothing about this is just like, nothing about this has any rational reason to it. It's just kind of like, hey guys, we needed to just do this thing told me like we really needed people with smiling masks to kill people and but we don't want cops to be in here. Well, the variation of of normal cops. So ultimately they're just like, well, hey, how about we just drop people into the world? Oh, that sounds great. But ultimately it's like none of it is quite to be made sense. But ultimately it seems like there is a hierarchy of mass characters. So anyways, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this show. So this is the first 8 episodes. Ultimately, if people like the review, then I'll finish the rest of this season. Ultimately, I just kind of kept watching up until a point where I'm just like, you know what, I want to get to other things and start to review other things. So hence why I didn't review the entire first season. So we ultimately have it to where Yuri ultimately wakes up seemingly in this place, in this new environment. There isn't any backstory of Yuri. It's just we are just supposed to invest in her because she's the only one that's really here. Like at first, it seems that Yuri, as well as everybody else, it seems at first to have a soul intact. To where ultimately everybody is uh, just going like, oh my god, like why is this thing attacking me? Why should I have to kill a person? So on and so forth. There's a whole lot of like questioning everything in the very beginning, of course, as per usual for every single thing that goes on into an anime that ultimately has like zombies or ultimately has whatever. You ultimately have to question everything. So we end up having it to where Yuri goes in here and we have it to where she's going and noticing that there is someone from further away in another building that is ultimately being attacked by a masked man. Ultimately, Yuri had also called her brother, and her brother had mentioned, "Oh my God, you're here? Like you're here with me? Oh, okay, well, uh, if anything, we have it to where her brother is overly explaining to everything to her. Basically, like so we get a setup from what is going on from this perspective of her brother, which I'm like, oh, okay, great. So ultimately, like right away, we're not just gonna go into complete confusion. Like right away, they're telling us like what is going on for us to understand, which I think is the greatest thing that you can do in an anime. Because I don't know how many times they'll just leave you in the lurch and just expect you to just figure out uh, in the episodes to go along. Like you'll have like let's say you have 8 episodes, and then you finally don't understand a lick of anything until the very last episode, and then like, oh yeah, here's everything. Here's the carpet, or here's the red carpet for you. We're gonna lay it all out now, and then you'll understand all of this, and you'll be happy that you understood all this. So we end up finding out that these masked characters ultimately are not to actually kill anyone. They are just supposed to instill fear into someone to where ultimately they end up going and jumping off the ledge themselves. But if ultimately the person will not go and kill themselves, well, then the masked man is going to eventually have to kill them off anyways. It seems that eventually we find that some of the masked men end up having kind of defective parts in their mask, which ultimately can give them certain adjustments to what they can do. It seems like the sniper masked man ultimately had a crack in his mask to ultimately have it to where like it seems that he has some kind of consciousness, but when also looking at it, um, he probably kills people like anyone else. We ultimately have it to where there are some characters like the chef mask that ultimately he was able to keep his will and be able to do whatever he wants, and also get the benefit of having the mask ability, because it seems we find out that it seems that these masks ultimately give people like enhanced abilities. So I'm like, well, that's kind of cheating, isn't it? Like you're basically having it to where you're not gonna just hire any wrestler or muscular person or skilled person or whatever. Like, no, you're just gonna like get anybody willy nilly and then just get it to where they are to get this special ability out of assess. So going into here, we ultimately have it to where seemingly that we have the girl who ends up jumping off the roof and to her death. So we ultimately end up finding out that seemingly we get to the point to where eventually the masked people have seen Yuri. Eventually we get it to a point to where ultimately we get it to where there's seemingly being some maid character that otherwise spots Yuri. And like, here's a really interesting moment where we end up having this maid character that ends up like jumping from building to building to get to Yuri, and she's like, "Oh my god!" And we end up having it to where Yuri is ultimately playing along and thinking that this masked character will not hurt her. Um, and also, eventually, we have it to where. Oh, wait, even before that, we end up having it to where Yuri ends up seemingly meeting police officers. Because we end up having it to where Yuri ends up kind of scrambling with this one masked individual, which I. Anyways, so we end up having Yuri scrambling onto this bridge with this masked individual, and then eventually we have the police officer that shoots this masked man down, and then ultimately we end up having it to where seemingly the police officer is going and shooting his superior, and then saying like, "Oh my God, this is a wonderful world that I'm living in now. Like I can do whatever I want," and so we end up having it to where this police officer ends up threatening to have Yuri declothe, and we end up having a sniper. The sniper mask character ends up shooting down this, seemingly this police officer, which was great, because ultimately this mask character again has some kind of ability to like kind of like he can kind of like waver some kind of things. Ultimately, he's not forced to do every little thing. So eventually, we have it to where Yuri ends up running off, and then the masked sniper can't go and kill her. So we eventually, like I said, we eventually have Yuri eventually run into this maid character, and so we end up finding out we're kind of making to the consensus of like, okay, is this an alternate dimension? Are these people robots? What's going on? Is the world all donezo? Is everyone dead in this world? What is going on? And so we end up having it to where Yuri's playing along with this maid to ultimately pretend like she is going to die. But then eventually we find out that seemingly Yuri had a gun from one of the police officers, and so ultimately she ends up going and firing at this maid, and eventually we have it to where this maid ends up losing half of her mask. And so it seems that ultimately we find out that when these characters lose portions of their mask, it seems that they are still under control because the mask goes out of its way to control whoever is on it. So like it's a mind thing. It's basically the mask controls the mind, and then so reasonably shortly thereafter, like a lot of the masked individuals want to basically go and kill themselves after they are to not be able to keep their mask on. So, and sometimes we kind of interestingly like figure out how far that goes to the point of when seemingly Mayuko ultimately goes and put a mask on, which I'll get to her eventually. We end up having it to where Mayuko ultimately goes and puts a mask on, and she ends up ceasing to seemingly be able to keep going on because her body just shuts down, which I thought was really interesting. So, speaking of which, so eventually we get a note that ultimately is to otherwise be found that Yuri is to go to a helicopter. because evidently there's a helicopter somewhere onto the roof. Even at some points, we have it to where Yuri's brother is trying to figure out exactly where she is, and then at some point we end up having it uh, to her getting attacked kind of negates all that, and eventually we end up seeing that she ends up breaking her phone, which I'm like, okay, well, if she finds somebody else, then if she knows her brother's cell phone number, I hope, then she'll be fine. So going on, so we end up having it to where Miyuko ultimately goes in and meets Yuri, because what ends up happening is Yuri ends up making it to this building where Miyuko is ultimately killing people to be the last one to be able to make it to this helicopter. And while that is also going on, we end up having the sniper mask character ultimately going in and shooting them, and to ultimately Yuri and Mayuko ultimately call a truce to ultimately just say like, well, hey, like if anything, you can get the helicopter, and then I'll just stay here. Like I don't really care. Uh, just kind of like whoever gets it is ultimately just whoever can get out of here, kind of thing. So we end up having this sniper mask ultimately going and firing bullets, and eventually we end up finding out that this sniper mask character is really good to where he can ricochet bullets off of any number of things. So we end up having it to where ultimately they end up evading the sniper mask and making up the building to otherwise realize that it's too late. And so they end up just deciding to end up being buddy buddy and being best friends, it seems like, in this environment. Like for me, I don't know if I'd be able to really and truly like sleep at night. I would just be so worried that I'm going to be attacked by somebody. Um, like you would think that they would just be like, yeah, I'm just going to go into one room and put like a billion things of furniture all against this door, and no one is ever going to come and get me, kind of thing. No one is ever going, like, basically, as long as no one is ever really going to see you or whatever, like, just freaking, like, uh, put a wall against the door, I guess, and you'll be fine. But when also looking at it, you may not, you may not do that well either, because you're eventually going to starve yourself, or eventually you're just going to run out of resources and whatever, and eventually somebody's going to see you do something out of a window somewhere. You're going to probably turn on a light or what, I don't know, any number of things. So going on into here, I guess they never really tried that aspect to help us understand like exactly how people were going to be fine while sleeping or whatever. And a lot of people just ended up like sleeping on top of buildings, and like everybody's just like, are we seriously going to be sleeping here? And it's like, yep, sure. So pushing on, so it seems that the longer and longer they go and do this game, eventually we have it to where uh, Yuri and uh, Miyuko ends up meeting more people. So we end up having where these two end up going and meeting a seemingly an elderly man that ultimately had lost his entire group to a doctor that otherwise had this ability to take one of the masked smiling characters and use this smiling character as his assistant. Like he has this ability. It seems that ultimately, when we have it to where there are certain people that I guess are one with God or whatever, that it seems that the masked characters cannot kill them. It seems that reasonably we have it to where the sniper mask had a girl named Quran, I believe, Shinzaki. Ultimately, it seems that Sniper had a girl like basically in his sights and could have killed her. And we have it to where Khan is ultimately asking the Sniper mask characters like, "Hey, are you okay? Like, are you like?" And he's like, "What are you talking about? Are you nuts? Like, dude, I'm supposed to kill you." And we have it to where ultimately Sniper Mask is getting the order to not kill this person, and he's just like, okay, I guess I don't kill you then. So we end up having it to where seemingly that. So what ends up happening is that uh, Khan ends up going and seemingly has the ability to fire off this big giant railgun of a weapon that ultimately destroys some building. And ultimately, it seems that this doctor is questioning that maybe Yuri or Mayuko had something to do with that. And that is their ability. And ultimately, Yuri ends up lying and saying, like, oh, yeah, like, that was me. That was me the entire time. Like, I did that. And so we end up having the doctor ending up surrendering and going and working with these people. We eventually find out that this elderly man had gotten injured and or hurt, and so ultimately this doctor had ended up having to forcibly take care of this person. All while we also have it to where we find out it seems like these masked individuals get colds and stuff like that, and they can't actually take their mask off. It's not like the Mandalorian where they have their mask off on the entire time. So we end up having it to where ultimately uh, Yuri is or Yuri Khan is ultimately with Sniper Mask, and they keep uh, butting into one another with Yuri, and ultimately it seems that Sniper Mask is ultimately wanting to maybe put together an alliance with Yuri and Meiku, Mayuko, and well, anyways, um, so we end up having it to where seemingly we have it to where eventually we kind of find out that Sniper Mask is almost helping Yuri and Miyuko at some point, which I thought was really interesting. So, moving on. So, eventually we have it to where uh, Miyuko is ultimately going and uh, finding out a chef mask. And this chef mask ultimately mentions that he has the full range of ability of his own free will, with also getting the abilities that ultimately the mask provides him to, I guess, give him strength or power or accuracy or whatever. We ultimately find that that eventually uh, Miyuko puts on the defective mask to otherwise help take out one of these masked individuals. We also get a backstory of Sniper Mask and how he had gotten to this point. Ultimately, it seems that there were two other masked individuals that ultimately had forced him to put this mask on and be this persona. It seems that there is some head masked individual that seems to be kind of orchestrating all this, and we don't quite understand quite why yet. So, going on into here, so we ultimately have Mayuko ultimately putting on the mask, and ultimately we have it to where Yuri is like, no one should actually look at these masks. Like, if anything, like, it'll just mind control you and then you'll just die forcibly. Because she had seen one person ending up losing half of their mask and ending up jumping off the roof. So, but Mayuko ends up getting the abilities of this chef mask, but eventually the entire mask ends up breaking But bizarrely, she keeps every single mask ability because the mask piece is all in her brain now, not in the actual mask. So basically, uh, we have it to Mayuko ultimately has the talents to ultimately try to take down any other number of these masked characters, and I thought that that was really just really interesting. So going in here, so eventually it seems that we are to eventually also have a like another group of people that are all wrangling together. It seems that ultimately there is a kid with a sledgehammer and a number of other people that are otherwise collecting together. And eventually, we are going to get it to where Yuri is eventually going to meet up with her brother or meet back up with her brother, because of course it has to eventually be written that way. But all the while, it's just kind of like commingling with a lot of stuff going on at the same time. So we eventually have it to where Miyuko ends up going and losing the ability to function with her body because ultimately, when the mask is gone, basically the masked people are mind controlled to otherwise die somehow. So we end up having it to where supposedly Yuri has to forcibly go and figure out how to become one with God so that ultimately she can control Mayuko to ultimately have it to where she does not die and ultimately Yuri can control her. So we end up having it to where seemingly easily enough, Yuri ends up becoming one with God with the otherwise guidance of Quran, and so ultimately we have it to where seemingly we have it to where there's a story where seemingly Yuri's brother ends up seemingly to get ambushed because we end up finding it that seemingly one of the group of his team ends up having a assist character. It ends up feeling like there are certain people that have the one with God ability that can otherwise have certain characters fight at their side. Like it seems like they had one Raiden character, and so we end up having a bunch of smiling mask characters ending up like teaming up together to ambush uh, Yuri's brother's group, and it ends up kind of backfiring it into their face to ultimately have it uh, to where seemingly they just end up taking two other smiling mask characters and having them assist them. So ultimately, it just kind of like, well, hey, like that was great trying to ambush us and all, but that it didn't work out in your flavor. So I think ultimately where this story is going is pretty interesting. I think I kind of really rushed through a lot of stuff. But ultimately, I kind of went into kind of the key important things going on here. I had seen so many different variations of anime stuff, or even certain anime shows that are, or I mean, certain things that got adapted from anime to be live action, and so recently a lot of Netflix series and stuff like that. Uh, and so recently, definitely check out. There was considering how very few videos have been on here. You could probably definitely check out. God, there was some card show. I don't remember what it was called. Uh, where it was definitely it had a really good first half, and it's also on Netflix. Also check out the anime Erased. I think that was kind of really interesting. Uh, but yeah, just check out all the other videos. You probably find something really interesting there, especially when it comes down to anime or just any other kind of number of things. So, I think with that, I think I'm going to call that a wrap so far. Um, recently, yeah, I think that this anime is really interesting so far. Again, I apologize for kind of rushing through everything, and I know probably a lot of people say it's like we didn't go to the perfect conclusion to where it ultimately just kind of like stops at some point. Um, like I think ultimately when I probably do the second half of this show, then eventually I will get into what I had left off or anything along those lines. But yeah, so I'm gonna call this one a video. I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.